Marian.
Hello there, James. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, and good to see everybody. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you for coming.
My name is James Manyika. I'm a Senior Vice President for Technology and Society at Google. And in addition to just recently having joined Google 10 months ago, I've spent probably what feels like a lifetime around these technology and society issues, whether it's in business, in government, but also in academia. And in fact, I'm actually reminded when Zubin was mentioning what he used to do with the old computers. I did my PhD in AI and robotics at Oxford about 20-something years ago, but my very first paper that I ever published on neural networks was actually in 1992 when I was still an undergraduate at the University of Zimbabwe. So it's just stunning to me just to see the amazing progress that's occurred. So I'm very excited to be here.
And I'm Marian Croak. It's good to see all of you. I'm a VP of Engineering at Google, and I lead the Research Center for Responsible AI and Human-Centered Technologies. In that area, what we do is we conduct research and we develop methodologies and tools to ensure that AI systems are behaving or performing in a responsible way along dimensions like toxicity, bias, safety, misinformation, and so forth. James, you've been here about 9 months, I think, right? What's the most exciting things that you've discovered since you've been here?
Wow, I mean, this has been so much fun for me. I mean, I think if I think about what's been most exciting to me since I joined Google, I guess I'm excited about all the amazing breakthrough research, some of which you've heard about, from generative models, but also multimodal systems, but the increasing generality of these systems. And also mention all the amazing progress in the science, and we haven't even talked much about that here, from quantum AI to all the work in protein folding lives. So all of that is very exciting to me. But I think if I think about this particular moment, I think there are 2 or 3 things that just stand out for me, Marian. One is the work that we've just been talking about around language. I think the fact that you just heard from Zubin describing just the amazing progress in language, that's just stunning to me. I mean, the universal speech model that Zubin described and the 1,000 Language Initiative is phenomenal. The other thing that also stands out to me is all the work that touches what's happening with climate science. You heard about the flood forecasting and the wildfire work and so forth. What's interesting to me, Marian, about particularly the flood forecasting work is the fact that we're now taking it to so many more places. I think we just added, like 18 new countries. I think 3 big countries in Asia, but also about 15 countries in Africa, where these things are going to make an enormous difference. So that's quite exciting to me. And then never mind all the creative work that Doug was just describing about it. That was just breathtaking to me. But Marian, you've been an amazing pioneering inventor for a very long time. You probably feel jaded, but what's stunning to you? What's amazing to you?
Well,
what you see?
One of the things that we're doing in our organization, and along with Doug and Zubin, is we're creating and conducting research that creates the ability for people to have more control over AI systems, so that they're actually collaborating with these systems as opposed to just defaulting to autonomous decision-making by them. And so I think that's really spectacular. And then there's been a lot of work in terms of allowing AI systems to provide the capabilities to help people with accessibility challenges. So, the inclusivity of that is quite amazing to me and important. However, as you know, AI carries a great deal of risk with it.
I think that's exactly right. One of the things that I was doing even before I joined Google was to work at the National Academies of Arts and Sciences, but also the Academies of Engineering, to think about what are these important risks and challenges that we need to think through. And I think, at least in my mind, Marian, they tend to be of 3 or 4 categories. And I think we have to think about each one of them. On the one hand, we've got all the kinds of risks and challenges when these systems don't work as intended. So that's where you think about things like bias and toxicity, and when they're not fully factual or grounded and kind of make stuff up. So we've got to think about those kinds of challenges. How do we address those? I think a second category of challenges are challenges when in fact, challenge of what I call use and misuse. So even if the system works as intended, are we actually applying these systems? And by we, I mean both the developers of the technology, but also the users of the technology. Are we applying it in the right way, as intended, in ways that don't cause harm? And so the use and misuse challenges and risks, I think, are quite important. I'd add a third category, which are often these systems have a lot of second-order effects or unintended consequences. One of the things I've spent a lot of time researching over the years is the impact, for example, on the labor markets, on jobs and so forth. So we have to be thinking about these second-order effects. But I'd also bring up one other last point, if I may, Marian, which is, I think Zubin touched upon this, and even others did too, which is, I think there's always a risk about how are we putting these systems out into the world? And what are the incentives around that? I think there's quite an easy thing to rush into putting what are still research systems out into the world before we've thought about the consequences, fully understood the potential, as well as the risks. So I think this question of how we put these systems out into the world. So I'm actually curious, maybe Marian, you can talk about, given these kinds of issues, how are we approaching these things at Google?
Yeah, so my organization, if you can think about it, is designed to bring the technical realization to the AI principles. And these principles, we articulated them in 2018. And I'm really proud of the fact that the principles actually put users and the avoidance of harms and safety above what are traditional business considerations. And I think if we're going to be leaders in AI, it's extremely important that we really push the state of the art on responsible AI technology and not just on plain AI technologies. And so, I don't want the principles just to be words on paper. As you said, I am a lifelong inventor and I love, theory, but I'm passionate about fixing things and wanting to discover ways to make things work in practice. So some of the ways that we put the AI principles into practice is we do adversarial testing constantly and continuously. And then we also make sure that we're setting benchmarks that are quantitative and can be measured and verified across all the dimensions of our AI. And so we also do that on a continuous basis. We also try to improve models with advanced research techniques like parameter efficient tuning that allows for more adaptability and agility. And then, within the organizations itself, what we try to do is have a very diverse set of researchers, those from the social scientists, from ethicists, from human rights experts, as well as AI and ML scientists. And then we also encourage a lot of community participation, as Doug talked about earlier as well. And so I think one of the visions that I have and that I think we will realize very soon, within a few years, is to embed all the capabilities of responsible AI deep within the technical infrastructure that supports the models, so that by default, from an end-to-end perspective, when you're doing the data collection, when you're doing the design, when you're doing the testing and training of these models, and then to the deployment and even out to monitoring them, you have RAI, which is responsible AI, just baked into the system.
And Marian, what's an example of a practical tool that you can describe for how we actually put all this into practice?
Well, one of the tools that we've created that I'm really excited about is called the Language Interpretability Tool, or LIT. And what that does is it gives researchers this visual understanding of how their models are behaving. So it uses like state-of-the-art technologies like salience maps and influence methods to allow researchers to answer questions like, why did my model generate that prompt? And if the response is problematic, what led to that behavior? And then what might happen if I cause different input to change? What might happen to the behavior of the model? And most of all, it gives you researchers the opportunity to improve their models by using new technologies and methodologies. So, I think it's very, very important that we open source models like that, and we have. Lit is available on platforms like TensorFlow, JAX, and other platforms for everyone to use. So, I think these tools are critical and very important.
I think one of the areas that's been on many people's minds is how we make systems like Lambda, any of these very large models, kind of responsible and safe to use. Can you take us behind the scenes a little bit, describe what actually happens behind the scenes on Lambda to try to make it safe and
Yes.
enhanced?
Yeah, Lambda is a very complex model, and so we've done the full responsible AI analysis on it, and we're still continuing to do it. So we first start with risk and harms assessments, and these are done by AI ethicists, the same ones that help create the AI principles. And we use those risk and harms that, they vary across toxicity and misinformation and bias and all the dimensions of responsible RAI. And we use those to create objectives, which we can quantify and measure. And then what we do with that is we then collect data, and we turn that data into conversations. And I'm going to use safety as an example for this conversation. So as we generate conversations, we either label them as safe or unsafe. And we have a diverse set of raters, labeling them.
Human raters.
Human raters, exactly. And then we feed that information, that data, into the model. And using ML, we then create safety classifiers in this example. And then we run the model again with the safety classifiers on, and we create just safe responses. And then we continuously collect data and feed it into the model so that we can have a more nuanced perspective of what is safe and unsafe. And so, Lambda presents a number of challenges, and I can just tell you about a couple of them. One of them is around rater diversity. So we go out of our way to make sure that, we're using raters that are diverse in terms of their demographics as well as their perspectives, and we get disagreements, which is what we want. But then what typically happens is we lose the richness of those disagreements by coming up with a normative standard across them. So the industry as a whole is facing this problem as to what to do with the valuable data that you get from diversity, and how do you use that in a constructive, positive way. The other thing that we've learned from Lambda is that classifiers have their limitations, so that we can say in a very dogmatic way, this is safe, this is unsafe. And that sometimes can take out the beauty almost of the model. And you come up with a very just a brute force approach where you lose the fullness of what people are trying to actually do. And it becomes very dull and unimaginative. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we have a more refined perspective on classifiers, so that we don't erase things that are important. Let me just give you a simple example. In many cultures, and one that I come from, the word dope can mean something that's very complimentary. So she's dope or he's dope is actually a compliment. If we use our toxicity filter, that would just get erased. And so many cultural idioms like that can just be wiped out if you over-constrain classifiers. So we're trying to strike this very delicate balance between having things safe and fair, and also allowing for the richness in our society and other societies.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing with that example, there's actually quite a lot of academic research on this topic about how do we think about curating these data sets and these kind of toxicity measures. It's an ongoing journey. But I'm also curious, Marian, you've been working on this at Google and before. Is there an example of something that you think we got wrong and we actually learned something from it? And what did we learn?
Yeah, so, I think one thing that we have learned is that generative models tend to make up answers occasionally. They'll make things up. And we have to, we've been doing very active research in order to improve the models and to mitigate against that by having factuality classifiers and filters. And we're doing active research to make sure that the responses are aligned with factual sources.
And you've just been describing some of the work you do to get this right, but is there an example of a responsible AI innovation you're excited about where we actually figured out a way to be responsible in a very innovative, interesting way?
Yeah, one of the things I'm most excited about that's going on in our organization right now is we've invented this tool that we can put on top of Lambda that will allow people who are not familiar with AI or ML, but are developers, to develop their applications, their AI-based applications. It's almost like a web-based interface into a very complicated model like Lambda, but you don't have to have all the expertise that someone like you would have in order to develop applications. So I'm very excited about that.
Croak, I've actually used it a lot.
Yes, yes.
But one of the other responsible AI innovations that I've actually been stunned by since I joined Google is the work you and your team and others did on the Monk scale. I don't know if people are familiar with that, which is one of the issues, for example, in images, is the ability to fully recognize the full spectrum of humanity. People like me, people of different colors. And I think historically there was something called the Fitzpatrick scale, which has been used since like 1973, which only took into kind of very narrow range of, for example, skin tones. So I think Google did some research, I think with the researchers at Harvard, to create the Monk scale, which is a much, much more expansive range of skin tones that actually covers all of humanity. And I think this was announced at I/O.
Yes,
and is now in open source. I thought that was pretty stunning as an interesting kind of responsible AI innovation. But I wanted to say a couple other things, though, which go beyond what we've discussed so far, Marian, which is clearly, this is a journey. As we tackle these issues and address some of them, new questions come up. So the responsible AI considerations are really a journey. At the same time, that journey needs to keep up with the advancement of the technology itself. And it seems to me that, in fact, this is something we all have to collectively tackle. So it's not just the developers and the researchers, but also ultimately the users, whether they're companies and organizations, or even governments for that matter, the users of these technology, as well as the regulators. So I'm actually quite excited by the fact that, Google's a place that actually embraces regulation. Because these technologies are far too important not to regulate for all the reasons we just discussed. But it seems to me that even as we regulate, we have to think about how do we get this right? And I'd like to test at least my view of getting it right to hear your take on this, Marian, which is, and this came out of some other work that I was doing even before Google, which is the idea of getting AI right seems to me to have two parts to it. One part is how do we actually make sure we are building the most useful, most beneficial AI capabilities and making sure that they're actually available to everybody. That seems to me to be an important part of getting this right. At the same time, how do we also tackle these complexities and risks and challenges? So it feels like getting it right is kind of getting both things right. I don't know if you agree with that.
No, I absolutely do agree. I mean, AI is a foundational technology and it can have immense social benefits. And as we heard from Doug, it can unleash all this creativity. But because it has, such a broad impact, right, to help people, the risk involved can also be very huge. And if we don't get that right, I mean, it almost doesn't matter that it provides so many benefits, because it can be very destructive. So I think the two, together are absolutely important. I also think the fact that we're working with outside experts, outside of Google, and community participants who are, very familiar with the impact that it may have on the societies that they live in, is hugely important. Working with policymakers is important, because we want to make sure that the policies that they're adopting we can actually put into real technical use. So, I think you're exactly right that this is going to take a village to get right and to do it well.
Well, thank you. It's been fun having
Yes.
this conversation with you. And I think we're now going to take this back to Zubin.
Zubin for closing, yes. Thank you.